Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, the weekly Q&A show where you ask me questions and I answer them. Sorry if I sound a little bit tired this week. I just got back from Vancouver not too long ago. I was there visiting for Kupo Con. It's a one-day convention that's it's Final Fantasy themed. It's fan-made, so it's not officially a Square Enix thing, but some very passionate people who are very, very excited about the Final Fantasy franchise put this together, and I've been to 3 of them now, with this most recent one at Vancouver. You know, they have cosplay, they have some Final Fantasy themed events, they have an after party, another reason I'm a little bit tired. It's just a good time. So if you check it out, if you just Google Kupo Con real quick, I think they're going back to New Jersey, maybe back to Toronto. I don't know what their other locations are looking like, but be sure to check it out. They've been to a few locations at this point. So before going on to the questions, we're not going to be doing them live on Twitch this week. We're just going to thank our sponsors over on Patreon at the start of the show. Thank you, those of you who have been supporting over on Patreon, especially as I've been trying to get back into the swing of things. I haven't been producing content at the rate that I would like to be. There's a lot of ideas that with recent events that I haven't been able to execute upon. I actually have a script for one of them right here. A little bit of a teaser. I was working on a series about WoW to 14, and this is something that I'm probably going to be getting a little bit more work done this week, where it's not so much about putting WoW versus Final Fantasy 14, it's just that with Battle for Azeroth coming out, there's been a lot more questions regarding, what's different about the games. And the last time I did a WoW and 14 video, like talking about the two, it was very weighted and biased towards 14. 14 wasn't out yet, and I was just trying to generate hype. So this one's going to be more of just stating flat out differences, showing no bias. And we're going to be starting with specifically talking about the global cooldown, because that's probably the biggest thing that World of Warcraft players have to overcome. And it's a huge topic right now with the changes that were made on the Battle for Azeroth alpha servers. So that's a little sneak peek there. But I want to thank the Patreon sponsors for continuing to support while I get projects like that underway, even though they haven't really come to fruition all the way yet. So we have our Patron of Light, which everyone tells me I just need to grab Mary's voice. I need his permission to do it, but I just need to grab his voice from State of the Realm from when he did it. Khuja Cross of the Jenova server, thank you, the Patron of Light. This is the image that he has for us this week. I actually haven't even looked at it. I downloaded it without even looking at it. I have it now. Oh, it's a nice house. It's a nice house. I'm not very style. I'm just gonna say it's a nice house because I don't have any style at all. So I don't know what's a nice house and what's not a nice house. So I'm gonna say nice house. So nice house. Let's thank the rest of our sponsors as well. Going from the bottom, we have our standard sponsors: Red Wings of Baron FC from Zalera, Fray Blackheart, Cidus, Oreo on Shiva, Syd Hellwind of Gilgamesh, Afro Ninja from Malboro, Cheesecake from Leviathan, Sploda, That Lame Weeb, Ashen Emiya of Cerberus, Argoti Tristam of Midgardsormr, Fafarian, Rendil, Giraffeswillrule, Stevie-Rex, and Neon. We have our elite sponsors. We have Sarah and the Avalanche family on Malboro. We have Johnny Odin on Tonberry. We have Nyrek Vizsla, the Emerald Dragoon. We have Kifka and the Great Eagles on Exodus. We have Dart Graver. We have Kat Ayoshi from Khuja, Skia Symphonia from Ragnarok, Rah Xephon from Exodus, Rynoet Westos, the Purple Warrior, Yadric Redsteel on Exodus, Lexxie Valentine, Mantaru the Rivivus FC from Zodiark, Sour Cream and Tribes from Jenova, Rynoet Chikara, Goetia Valfer of Siren, Hirsch of Fairy, Phoenix Down Free Company on Goblin, and Saren from Zodiark. Finally, we have our premium sponsors. We have Diablo, Holy Tabasco, Red Thorn Asura, Kurenai Oni, Asgen Hawk from Shiva, Oscar, Crash015, Mustang, the Serenity FC on Ultros, Kat Kazuma. We have, and let me make sure, this was a change that I had to make, and I just want to make sure that I'm 100% accurate on this one. Yes, okay, Serial Kira, that's what I had written down, just wanted to make sure. We have Serial Kira and the Reckless Tea Party Free Company on Cactar, Ignis Fairgun from the Diablo server, Valestra of Fanfrit, Nox Cordis from Excalibur, Provos Moonscar, Nakaneyame of Balmung, Private Mikey, Spike, Nadi Kirasame, Rudy Rudiger, Tin Colossus, Killer Hackman, Raul Jr., Ramil Gaming, and Kiltastic Jones. Thank you to all of our Patreon sponsors. If you want to sponsor us over on Patreon, it's really just to supplement the YouTube channel with all the changes that were made recently. But now that it seems to be calming down, I think I need to get on actually creating the Patreon stuff that I had planned months ago before I fell behind on that with everything that happened. So I think now is the time I need to reinvest some of my time into that. So be on the lookout for that stuff going forward into the future. On that note, though, we've got about 10 questions on the forum, so let's get started with those finally. All right, first question. Hey, Haps. Hey. As he mentioned, they're going to offer content players have yet to see in MMO. Is that Eureka, or can we expect something new? So this was mentioned separate from Eureka. At the point they had made this comment, Eureka as a concept had already been revealed at one of the live letters. So this should be something that's different altogether from that. But it's always hard to tell with that comment what it means. I mean, the duty recorder could technically be considered that, because I don't know, at least I personally don't know of an MMO that has a feature like that. But whatever it is, we haven't seen it, we haven't heard about it yet. And we don't know what, if anything, it will actually come to be. It might be one of those comments where Yoshida kind of makes the comment a little too prematurely, and it doesn't come to full fruition, looking at Grand Summoning, which we'll be able to talk about a little bit over the coming weeks in Heaven on High. But it's hard to tell. There's no clear answer on this one, so whatever it is, it's not Eureka. But will it actually be something that is good, or is it something that really is never before seen? Is it an exciting idea or concept or creation when it's finished? We don't know yet, so we'll just have to wait and see. Question number 2. Hey, Happy, long-time watcher, first-time asker. Greetings from Finland. Hello from California. Doesn't nearly sound as exciting as saying from Finland, does it? Oh well, let's get to the question. My question, what do you think about people unsyncing almost everything nowadays? Even newbies want to unsync their normal mode story content. Sometimes I see unsync parties on Party Finder for Stormblood content that you can't even do yet. I'd like to see some changes for this, i.e. you need to clear it synced before the game allows you to unsync it. I see a lot of people who can't do any basic mechanics because they've never experienced those. Are people getting lazier, or why aren't they willing to spend some time to do stuff in the real way? Most of them keep saying how no one does the old content anymore, while these same people keep doing roulettes every day, which are basically old content all the time. So this is a multifaceted answer, so let me hit the first thing. The unsync parties for Stormblood content you can't do yet. That's a mix of people who don't know how unsync works. There are a few legitimate cases of that. That's another case of sometimes people just trolling the Party Finder. There's a few other instances I could think of where people in the Party Finder do that. That's a pretty common one that I tend to see. If not, people who just don't know how unsync works altogether. And then as for always making people do synced content first, I can guarantee you that we would lose a large chunk of people if you were forced to do things synced before doing them unsynced. A main reason for this is that the game has gotten better at teaching things at the later points in the game, which is backwards as all hell. Basically, at level 50, you'll learn barely anything because everything just topples over. At 60, maybe a little more. You'll start to see some of the changes they made in Heavensward, such as the stack with other people marker and some of the other new AoE markers they started creating around the 3.x time frame. And then once you get to 4.x, you have all of those things plus even more quality of life visuals and I guess boss fight designs that are just better at teaching players how it works than these older fights where, you know, there are a lot of split damage AoEs back in the Realm Reborn days where there was no way of knowing what it was going to do. You know, another example is Titans stomping the ground and knocking everyone away. That was something you pretty much had to die to always the first time. Nowadays, it wouldn't be too surprising for us to have an AoE marker for something like that. So there's just so many things that have happened over the years, and I don't think that making people do something synced before doing it unsynced is necessarily a healthy thing overall for the game. It would promote better play potentially, but it would also result in a lot of players who are not interested in that degree of difficult content, and they really want to wait till it's unsynced so they can blow past it and try to get things after its relevancy. Those people are now stuck because they either have to get carried by friends or they just don't do it because they're not interested in it. It's not even necessarily about whether you're skilled enough to do it. There are people who just straight up aren't interested in doing level 50 Titan Extreme right now. You know, they'd rather just go in there as level 70, maybe with a friend, and just beat it just because it's way easier to do it that way. There's less room for, or there's less chances of you making a mistake, etc., etc. So that's one example, but I don't think it's necessarily healthier for the overall game, even if it is healthier potentially for people knowing mechanics. Just those people won't ever get to the point where they get to use them because, to be honest, the vast majority of people would probably just give up at that point with a lot of those things. It's not so much lazy, it's just there's a lack of interest. As much as I'm a raider, and I'd love to believe a lot of people are all about self-improvement and you know, bettering their game and moving up to the next piece of content, the reality is that's not the case at all. Just not there is not that high of a degree of interest in synced content at the lower levels. The only reason why roulettes get away with it is because they're roulettes. The one roulette that a lot of people fear is the Mentor roulette, because it's the one roulette where you can see things like Coil and Extreme Primals that are all synced, and it can lead to some pretty hilarious disasters that we've all seen reported about from our friends or on Reddit or the forums or someplace or other. So that's the only place you really get it. Nothing else in that roulette is a higher end level of content. So you can't get people to do it willingly. They kind of just have to end up there on their own. So no, I just don't think I don't think it has any real benefit to the game. If someone wants to experience it synced, they will find 7 other people that want to experience it synced. If they do not, then they won't. They'll look for the people who want to do it unsynced, and that's the way they want to play their game. Question number 3. Hey, Mr. Happy, first timer from the Buckeye State. I don't know what state that is. If I wager a guess, I'm afraid of getting it wrong, although I have a decent idea in my head. Just now getting to a Stormborn. Alright, that's Bloodborne and Stormblood. Stormblood, and had 2 questions. 1, what should I be doing besides story? I've been playing a maxed warrior for a while, and I've been leveling ninja. I don't really know what I should tackle first. I mean, just look at the list of things you can do, and and then decide which the things you want to do. You know, are you interested in savage raiding? Well, then increasing your item level and then hopping into some pugs for the most recent raid tier, which would be Sigmascape, would be probably where you want to go. Are you someone who's interested in the Evil East story? Well, then hop in the old 24 man and try to deal with that before we change over to the all greed system at the very least. Are you someone who wants to get all your jobs to 70? Then focus on that. You really need to ask yourself, just it's not what you should focus on, because finishing the story is the one thing that gates you from, I guess, accessing everything else. Once you're done with the story, it's not about what you should be focusing on, it's about what you want to focus on. Because not everybody has, like I was saying with the prior question, not everyone has aligned interests in the game. So ask yourself that, decide, what is it I really want to do? Do I want to get the highest item level stuff? Do I want to beat the hardest bosses? Do I want to do housing? Do I want to do any micro goals, like, you know, maybe, I don't know, certain achievements, or going back and getting old mounts, or trying out, you know, Palace of the Dead solos, or leveling other jobs in Palace of the Dead to get my mind ready, or familiarize myself for Heaven on High. There's a million goals that you could come up with. It's just a matter of which ones you actually want to do. So ask yourself, what do you want to focus on after you're done with the story? And then 2, what do you think of the new Dark Knight tweaks? I'm not a tank, so I really shouldn't be answering this. All I'll say is I'm not confident that they will be substantial outside of a numerical value. I feel like a lot of Dark Knights I speak to have more core issues about the job's function and less about what its actual outputs are. I feel like we're going to see numerical changes and not necessarily core gameplay tweaks. I would love to be wrong about that and maybe get a little bit of both, but that's just where I'm going to hedge my bets. I've just seen other jobs be in similar situations. But then I've seen Warrior, which literally gets full-on job tweaks both times that it happened to be in a really odd state. So, I don't know, they just really like Warriors. I think we've come to agree. But I couldn't tell you fact for fact what I think they'll be. Look at that. When did that happen? I like spit out of my mouth and it landed on my lip. That's disgusting. But anyway, yeah, that's what I think about the Dark Knight tweaks. 1 second, I just need to wash my hands after that. Alright, question number 4. Hey, Mr. Happy, do you think Square Enix will fix the LB Cheese method top speedrunning groups are using? Basically, take off all your armor before the battle begins to get your HP low, and put it back on and survive the life-threatening hits with shields to boost the limit break. For example, the top group in Kefka had 2 LB3s and 1 LB2 in a 5-minute and 21-second fight. Clearly, this is being taken advantage of. I do not consider this a bannable offense in any way, because the game has always used this system, but I think it's about time to change it. How would you go about changing? I wouldn't. The only people who are doing this reliably are people who are already so done with the content that they're just pushing the absolute maximum of what they could do in a fight itself. If you are so skilled that, you know, this fight, it's candy, it falls over, there's nothing to even look, you barely even have to look at your screen. You could be watching Netflix and doing this type of content at the same time, unless you decide to push it to the full-on maximum in cases like this, then, you know, that's awesome. I'm glad that you're able to find a way, even if it's a really weird way of doing it, to push yourself to the absolute limit. And clearing regular, I'm assuming you said a top group in Kefka, 5-minute, 21-second fight. I'm assuming you mean that it's Savage, like Keffaust. It's not made clear here, but I don't have FF logs up here, so I couldn't look at it, you know, from the get-go. But if you've gone out of your way, you've learned the fight. Like, this isn't a trick that's gonna, like, make a group that's incapable of beating the fight suddenly capable of beating the fight. So it's not something that I feel really ever needs to be approached. I'd also like to point out that while they do that for the start of the fight, the rest of their LB generation is coming down to basically just using shields to survive. which is something that, again, as you state, has always been the way the game works. If a shield saves your life, it generates a ton of limit break. So it's not even just about the way they did the start of the fight. They clearly had a very good handle on exactly how to save themselves with only shields across the rest of the fight as well, which is great. That's another way of using the system. That's another way of, you know, showing off your knowledge of the system and getting more out of it, which is almost like a very subtle amount of group skill expression that we don't really get to see all too often. So no, I wouldn't change the system, and I wouldn't change it, and I wouldn't advocate for any changes of it. I wouldn't like changes to it, and I don't even really go out of my way to do this kind of thing ever. I just like the expression that it gives for people who are basically done with content to really try and push themselves to the max and squeeze out those extra seconds. Question number 5. Hello, mister. Hello. Main question at the bottom. All right. Well, I'm still gonna, it's not actually that long, so I could read the whole thing. Always wondering if I'm doing something wrong on Bard. I was always under the impression that when I'm in a dungeon, you're up against a group of enemies, like 3 or more. It was good to put both of your dots on each enemy before spamming AoE. I did a dungeon recently as a Bard doing just that, and the tank was being a jerk and giving me crap about not spamming AoEs. I was going to, but I wanted to dot on all the enemies first. The tank made it seem like I was doing it wrong by not spamming AoEs from the start, so now I'm confused. Isn't having a dot on every enemy good for resetting Rain of Death skill more frequently whenever a dot does crit damage? I would be spamming knock after putting dots everything up. So what you're doing is correct. Putting dots on enemies before then going and I guess going with ballad and quick knock, which is what you would suggest doing next. That is what you do. However, it seems like you may be over dotting, because you have to remember that every GCD that you spend doing this is a GCD that at some point could have been a quick knock. So there's a hard cutoff there. Now, as someone who is, again, not experienced on Bard, I do know this is the general way to do it as you're describing. I don't know what the hard cutoff is. When I was leveling Bard, I made my hard cutoff 4 dots, regardless of which targets they were on. I would usually aim to put 2 dots on one target and 2 dots on another target, and then I would go into what you're describing right here. I don't know if I don't know if 3 is where this stops being effective. I don't know if 5 is where this stops being effective, but that might be why. If he had like a group of 6 enemies, and you're trying to dot up 3 of them, at this point you're 6 GCDs in, I can practically have a group down to under 50% HP AoEing with my co-DPS and the tanks and the healers in 6 to 8 GCDs. And at this point, your dots would not have contributed nearly as much. So getting a couple of GCDs in there, when I leveled Bard, I aimed for 4 total dots across 2 targets. It doesn't even matter if it's across 2 or if it's across 4 targets. It doesn't matter. As long as you have 4 dots applied. It just makes it so that if it's on 2 targets, you can Iron Jaws if the pull goes on way too long and keep them going, as opposed to with 4, when they start falling off, you have to do them all manually again, so it wastes even more GCDs. So yeah, you're doing the right thing. It's just you might be dotting too many enemies. Like if there's 3 enemies, I wouldn't spend 6 GCDs dotting them up. I would again spend a maximum of 4, but I would also look up a guide to find out when the mathematical stopping point should be, because that information will be way more reliable than what I'm telling you right now. Question number 6. Ayo Haps, got a quality of life question for you about Eureka. Sure, let's see what we got. So due to the Fate train, it's really difficult for the lower levels to level since no one is doing chain parties, and for the most part, the train won't spawn the low-level NMs anymore. I think that if they made it so that if you're 2+ levels under the recommended level, you get 0. That way, the low-level NMs won't be doing things the low levels won't be doing things far above their level, and if you're 3+ levels above the recommended, you get 300 XP, so the high levels will stay away. So you're basically trying to segregate the players. So in theory, if it's designed this way from the start and it's encouraging that, I guess, play style from the get-go, you still have an issue where low levels are pretty much forced to only play with other low levels, which creates a similar issue to when you have someone who, like for example, if I was to invite my friend who's never played 14 before, and I'm level 70 and he's level 1, we create this discrepancy where, for the most part, he's doing stuff I can't really do with him at all. There's the occasional thing I can maybe step in our interest align, which could be like a dungeon, but for the most part, he's just going up through the story quests, and I can't really do anything to actually actively assist him in it, other than maybe stand behind him, heal him, murder enemies after he tags them, or hand him gil or gear, stuff like that. Like, it's all about trying to keep the low levels involved in the content, despite the fact that so many people have already gone out of their way and gotten to the higher elemental levels. This is why the NM train, one of the reasons the NM train is so popular, is because you can join it regardless of level, as long as, I'd say, get to level 3, get a Protean Crystal at the very least first, so you could do that first quest. But other than that, It's just a way for everyone to participate without really needing to segregate by level. So I don't think this is really quality of life. I think it's a different approach to the way the content would work. But it's hardly quality of life. The low levels are then, they can't play with the high levels. Now, level syncing, a feature that a lot of people have asked for, would in some way remedy this. But again, you have the issue of high levels being able to do content a certain way and low levels kind of being segregated to these small corners. So I suspect that a lot of high levels would not even participate unless it was a personal friend or someone from a link shell or free company or something along those lines. So I'm not necessarily a fan of the way the Fate Train operates right now, specifically because the low levels, most of them to actually even get invited, they need to like go red mage, white mage, something with a res. You know what I mean? And instead of like playing something that they would generally enjoy playing. So I feel like they do need to find a way to approach low levels not being forced to join in on content that their elemental level just simply doesn't support. But they also need to not make it so that the low levels are just screwed when they come later. And that's a tough balance to hit. So I have a feeling we'll see a lot of that with the daily and weekly hunts they'll be adding to Eureka. And I'm hoping that they'll make some other adjustments in Pagos itself that will make it a little bit easier to play together. I have a feeling Pagos is not going to jump up to elemental level 40. Only jumping up to elemental level 30 means that people who get to Pagos at 20 are already pretty close to being in range of the level 30 people, as opposed to a level 1 being against level 20. So it might make things a little bit easier. I would also like to see content that promotes group play outside of just hunting notorious monsters. Something that is more limited to just your group participating in a set activity. There are a few things they could do for that, and we've already beat this topic to death, so I won't go any more in depth about it. But I do think they can make adjustments. I just don't think that making you completely ineligible to participate in content based on your level is necessarily the best way to go about it. Hey, Happy, good afternoon. It is indeed the afternoon. It's 2:41 p.m. and it feels like 2:41 a.m. to me. That's how tired I am. But let's get on to the questions. 2 quick questions. If you only have time for 1, that's okay. I don't see why I wouldn't have time for 2, so let's check them out. 1, I've never really been able to raid much with my schedule being so erratic at work. I hear a lot about FF logs. How exactly does that site work? Is it an honor system and folks just enter parse numbers after runs? What about PS4 users? So FF logs, so I'm not an FF logs user. I have plenty of people who are in my static. We have people who upload every single one, unless it's one where like we had 6 deaths. They're like, yeah, don't upload that one. But basically all it is when you use a program called Advanced Combat Tracker. When you finish a fight, you can have it, well, if you have the FF logs extension or whatever it's called installed, I think it can automatically update it. But I think you can also just export a run on ACT, export it, and then upload it directly to FF logs. So you're not just inputting numbers. It's literally looking at a log of all of your actions throughout the course of the fight, your uptime on the boss, your crit rate, which abilities you used, how often you use them, did anyone die, what did they die from, how much damage did the boss do. People aren't manually putting all that information in. It's being taken from whatever information Advanced Combat Tracker actually picks up from the encounter itself. For PS4 users, you can't upload. You don't have ACT, you don't have access to that. So the only way for you to see yourself on FF logs on PS4 is to have a member in your static actively upload it because they're using it because they can and you can't. So that's about it. Yeah, basically the best way to go about it if you are a PS4 user and you need some sort of tracking for your DPS is to do some content with a pal who runs it and have them upload for you, and then you use those as your proof, I suppose. You could also record fights, and then people who are skilled at their jobs or are someone who is experienced with a static could generally look at that kind of footage and determine, if you were doing the right things at the right times, where things could have been different, what your judgment was like. So if you're looking to apply to a raid, things like that can be very valuable, depending on what kind of static you're actually looking for, or what kind of raiding experience you're actually looking for. Now, moving on to question number 2, with the recent live letter talking about how there will be grand summoning within the next deep dungeon. In regards to the lore, wouldn't grand summoning literally be against everything the Scions and the Warrior of Light fight for? Using primals for our benefit seems base awkward to me. So it depends, because we don't know how grand summoning is defined. We don't know what the laws are within the Heaven on High. When it came to Palace of the Dead, it felt like a lot of things didn't make sense. How did wandering souls end up here? What was the palace's purpose? There are things that didn't make sense to us right away. And even still to this day, we have questions about what the true meaning is of the final floors, because there's no story explanation other than that's probably purgatory or hell over the last floors. I'm sure there's some sort of ancient like myth that it pulls from, that people recognize it from, that I don't know off the top of my head. But with Heaven on High, it could be the same thing. It could be that the primals inside of there are summoned just from the ether within the rooms that you're actually participating in, and that using them and eventually having them expel is basically the same effect as just defeating them in the first place. So it's quite possible that it could be, there's a ton of ways they can make it work from a lore perspective without it draining ether from the land. Just, we don't know what the environment, what the atmosphere, what the ether buildup is like inside of Heaven on High. So we'll need that information before we know exactly how for or against the lore this is. But they're not going to put Grand Summoning in there without explaining it, you know what I mean? So I would just be patient, wait for the official explanation of how it works and why it works in the first place. All right, question number 8. You mentioned that they had requesting for armor repair in 1.0. Said there were other things that were better in 1.0 and not in the game now. What were they? I don't know if there were necessarily other. That's really the one big thing that there was that was better, and like it wasn't even better. It's just we don't have the option anymore. So it's just nice. It would have been nice to have the option nowadays. You know what I mean? But other things that were better, I have a hard time thinking of anything that was better. I mean, okay, let's look at it from a different perspective as opposed to better. The beast tribes and their strongholds were very dangerous. They were considered basically miniature outdoor raids in a sense when it came to 1.x. Some people prefer that experience as opposed to the way we have it now, where, you know, the beast tribes are basically just completely, you know, pushovers, and they're non-threatening or stuff like that. You needed keys to open doors, and they weren't even large strongholds. They were pretty much just, I guess, a slightly, enlarged version of what we have now. But, I mean, for some people, just having that sense of danger is considered better than the way it is now. And some people are like, well, we wouldn't have beast tribe dailies in there if we did have it the way it was now. Or the beast tribe dailies would require, like, you know, 4 to 8 party members, and people would complain when people stopped doing it, and then you run into other issues, and, you know, it all depends on perspective for that one. But the only one feature that I really, really miss from 1.x is the ability to ask someone to repair your armor for you. And keep in mind, I can repair all my armor. I have them leveled enough, but other people in the group may not, and I'd love to be able to fix that for them. All right, question number 9. Haps, and let's hope the Ridorana Lighthouse has a neat option. It won't. I can promise you that because we've seen the official digest at this point. So, Monk's Tackle Mastery, Kill the Grind, and more persistent emotes. Well, I'm definitely not going to take the emote one. Kill the Grind sounds like a Eureka question. And Monk's Tackle Mastery? Have I beaten these topics all to death at some point? I'm going to take Kill the Grind because I feel like Tackle Mastery I've beaten to death so many times. Let's see. With finishing the 3.0 and 4.0 dungeons, you get an equipment piece of the dungeon as a reward, which is nice. Would it be okay to have the option to turn it off? Not asking for removal. So I'd imagine if you wanted that option off, it would need to be flagged for everyone in the instance, because they'd probably have to disable it instead of per person. They'd have to disable that entire entry, almost like an option in the dungeon setting, similar to Unsynced. So would it be okay? Yeah, I mean, it'd be fine. It's not like there's a big problem with it from a moral standpoint. Like, I don't need all this extra crap. I don't put it in my inventory. But would they ever do it? I don't think so. I don't think they would ever give you the option, because there's probably too many checks that have to go into place to make sure that you end up in a party that all agrees to that, and they probably don't have the ability to turn it off, or at least not the easy access to program it to actually just disable it for you and you only. And the final question we have here over on the forums is, Hi! I have run out of different versions to say, Mr. Happy, but I do have a real kind of question this time, not involving salt and pepper seals. What? All right, I'm good. Let's see how this goes. Do you want to see Savage Tears being as hard as Gordius or Midas again, but for more fair reasons? And do you think they will ever make them that tough again? Now that Ultimate is the thing, I joined this game at 3.4. I've noticed Delta and Sigma have been pretty easy for rating. So would I be okay with Gordius and Midas level of difficulty? Now, I personally am absolutely okay with it. I rated through Gordius. I was world 6th. I was the one of these 6 clears of A3 Savage when it first came out. That happened before weapons were available. Midas, I didn't get to progress it naturally, but when I got around to doing it, I love that raid tier. But for more fair reasons, I guess you have to determine what you I guess, call fair. Because when we look at Gordius, gear gating was really only a major issue in A4 Savage. A3 Savage was probably, let's be honest, it was absolutely defeatable in the first week. If people knew the fight, and let's say if you put people in the first week of A3 Savage, and let's say they knew the whole fight, they had even practiced it before it released, they could beat it in that first week, no doubt. It wouldn't have been necessarily gear gated, but you would have had to be at the very top of your game to clear it in that very first week, just like you had to be in the second week, which was when it was eventually cleared before the third week when they got weapons. But then you get to A4, and it was just, I'm pretty sure that there's a group that beat it at full item level 190. I believe it was in China. It was sometime way after the game had come out. I think they ran triple melee machinist, and I don't remember the rest of the composition. And then so you could technically argue that wasn't gear gated, but that was compositionally gated. So that becomes another issue in itself. So I guess it depends on what you determine is a fair reason. Because Nisi being a pain in the ass, is that a fair reason? Yeah, it was shit, but technically it was fair. No, it wasn't. That thing did not play nice at all. What's that? I didn't come anywhere near touching you? What's that? We're in different locations on the screen. It's alright, we touch each other anyway. Looking at you also, Digititis. Midas, same deal. Midas was a little bit, I guess, gear gated, but I guess I don't really know how we would gauge Gordius and Midas nowadays anyway. Gordius and Midas were the two raid tiers in Heavensward that did not benefit from cooldowns resetting after every pull. If we went back and did Gordius and Midas with no sort of cooldown, I feel like they all would have died quicker, even A4 Savage, with all the trouble that went into that. Just because anytime you're waiting on cooldowns, it's minutes, hours eventually lost on progress, and that made a big difficulty in creator, or a big difference in creator. But I'd say the biggest difference, I'd say the gear scaling, and I guess the expectation of how much gear you'd have for defeating these things was probably the one thing that made them seem as hard as they did. They were very clearly scaled to item levels that were above what we had, or the expectation that was, if you were the lower item level, the amount of effort you had to put in was significantly higher. There's a lot of instant wipe mechanics, a lot of, you screwed this up and there's no way your team is coming back from it, or one person screws it up and everyone pays for it. There's so many different things that made Gordius or Midas what they were than just these fights were harder. And I think that a lot of that gets lost when looking back at Gordius. Also, Gordius being the first raid tier in a new expansion, a lot of people were still learning their jobs at that point. Midas, not so much the case anymore, but a lot of mechanical vomit. So, I'd be okay with it, ultimately. I like to look at it from all perspectives, though. I don't think it would be healthy for the game. I think the best option is still having more raid bosses, specifically the Savage tier raid bosses. I think having 6 would be a nice number, but I also recognize that that is so unlikely to ever happen, so that we could get a more standard difficulty curve, and maybe the last fights, a little bit above what it is now. That it's not even something I'm like crazy about. It's something I'll always mention. It's something I'll always wish for. And it's something I'll always express, but it's not something I will ever expect nowadays. With Deltascape and Sigmascape, we've had the most, I guess, successful raid tiers in Final Fantasy XIV's history. The highest engagement levels, the highest number of people attempting a raid for the first time, people actually progressing in clear rates and all that stuff. So for the health of the game, Delta and Sigma are good for what they are. Ultimate, it's going to be good for the little bit of time that it takes for people to beat it, because I do suspect this one will die faster than Ultimate Coil did. But yeah, I just think that once you get to a certain level, you're never going to please the people who are like me, or who want just this insane challenge. You're never going to please these people until they find something else that they find is an insane challenge, and then they overcome that, and then they complain because now they're at another point where it's just a constant loop where you can't satisfy us. We whine and we just want tougher fights and harder things, and we don't care very much what happens to other people in the process, and then we're a disaster. It's people who raid at just trying to kill things fast and just at a high level. So it's just, we suck. We ignore us. We just selfish. We just want things our way. But anyway, that's going to be the last question for this week. Again, thank you to our sponsors over on Patreon. Thank you to our patron of light, Khuja Cross from the Jenova server. And thank you to everyone who attended Kupo Con. If I got to see you there, I got some gifts. I'll probably be showing those off. I think I just got 2 or 3. I got a couple of keychains and 1 or 2 other things that I gotta take a look at in my backpack. But If you attended, I got to see you and I got to take a picture. Thank you so much for coming out and enjoying the panel and saying hi and all that great stuff. It was definitely something I needed that weekend in particular. It made me feel better. So thank you. If you have questions for next Mondays with Mr. Happy, ask them in the description. You'll find a link to the forums. Go there, ask the question there, or tune into the Twitch chat around 12:30 p.m. Pacific time on Sundays to watch the live recording of Mondays with Mr. Happy. On that note, though, I'm going to get this rendered, figure out what I'm doing for the rest of the week, put together some plans, and I will see all of you, fine ladies and gentlemen, next week for the next episode of Mondays with Mr. Happy. Thank you, and until next time, take care.